Hi, I'm Robert James, and welcome to this edition of the ISG Journey Through Gemology Education Series. Today, we're going to talk about something very interesting. We're going to talk about gem identification. And we're going to talk about a couple of methods of gem identification that go a little beyond what most gemology schools teach. Because I have found, as you know, I hold the FGA for the Gemological Association of Great Britain. I hold a graduate gemologist, certified gemologist, AGS, a lot of stuff. But the main thing is, I find that every graduate from every school that I know has a tendency to have a problem with gem identification because of the way that gem identification is taught. And it's something that has been around for a long time because the basic method of gem identification that is taught, in other words, the procedures and the steps to do gem identification, has been convoluted and it's been complicated. Now, I have some students that get in there and just really make it happen, and they have no problem. But I'm having a lot of students that are really having a problem because they feel lost. They start to do gem identification, they get a stone in front of them, and they're lost on where to start. And that's what we want to talk about today. Now, I'm going to present to you a different concept of gem identification than what most schools teach. We teach it here, we have for a long time, and it's the concept of inductive versus deductive gem identification. And this actually came really to fruition for me recently, during the COVID breaks and everything else that was going on and all the problems that have been happening in the last few years. I spent time, and most of you all know that I attended the Harvard University higher education teaching certificate program and actually earned the higher education teaching certificate from Harvard University. And one of the things they taught was how to teach. Well, it was an amazing program that did a great deal of benefit as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the teaching and helping me understand how to reach to you. And we have one of our graduates, Dr. Reg, that is a PhD, and he's a teacher, and he's the one that started getting me towards this and telling me that, there's a better way to do this. The old traditional way, that has worked for a long time has not worked really well, and there's a better way to doing it in what we do. And Dr. Reg got me on this, and thank you again, Dr. Reg. I appreciate you, because this was an eye-opener, and certainly attending this program with Harvard University was an eye-opener. And I want to transmit this to you all today through this Journey Through Gemology edition, because it's fairly simple, but it works, and it works 100% accurate. And if you'll follow what we're going to talk about here, it's going to help. And so what we're going to do is talk about inductive versus deductive gem identification, and compare the two and give you some examples of how to do it correctly. And if you follow what I'm going to be talking to you about here, you will do 100% accurate gem identifications. And from the very beginning, you'll know exactly what you need to do and what steps to take to get that accurate identification. So what I'm going to do, I've got a little slide presentation here that I want to show you because I think it'll be more graphic for you to really see this, to understand how these two concepts work and why one of them is so much better than the other. Let's take a look at this right quick. Let's talk about inductive gem identification versus deductive gem identification. What we're going to start with will be defining what these two are. Inductive gem identification. There's several steps of this. The first thing, you have to obtain and maintain a wide variety of gemological testing tools. If you're doing it inductively, what the inductive ID means is that you're putting in a lot of information to try to get an answer out. You're inductively you're inducting it in there, and you're putting a lot of information in there, trying to figure out an identification. So it takes a lot of gemological tools. Second thing, you have to maintain a lot of reference books. You've got a lot of reference books, charts, everything else you have to get, because once you get all your test results, you got to try to figure out what those results mean. And it takes a lot of reference books and charts and things. Third, you got to rely on those reference books to compare your test results. And that's part of the problem, because you got to perform a wide array of test results, and then you go to your book and start looking at it and say, well, what matches all of this? I have all these test results. What is in these reference books that matches what I have as far as all the testing that I have done? And then you wind up searching through reference materials to find a gemstone that best matches the test results of the gemstone. You're looking for a best match that you can get from the reference material, from all the tests that you've run. This is inductive gem identification and how most people unfortunately do it. Now you eventually have to make the identification based on the best match of all the information. And this is where I have students with this all the time. They say, well, I got to all this and I had all these test results and all I could find was this that was closest to it, so it had to be that. And yet one of their test results is totally showing it not to be what it should be. I had an example recently where we had a student just get lost and they had a refractive index reading of 1.81. It's purple stone, and the only thing they could come up with to figure this out, had to be a tanzanite. And once again, students, I mentioned the events, I don't mention the names, but we have to all learn from each other's mistakes because as you know, as I've said before, I teach you by my mistakes. So we have to learn from these things. And of course, tanzanite does not have an RI of 1.81. It cannot be a tanzanite. That absolutely, as soon as you see the 181, it cannot be a tanzanite. So you can't just get to the end of the road and have all these reference books and have all these test results trying to figure out what matches the best and come up with something. I've even had some students go onto Google and find just weird stuff that's not even gemstones, but it's the closest thing they could find. That's inductive gem identification. You're inducting all of this information and trying to figure out what it is. And this is not the way to do it because here's the results. It relies on printed information in a reference book and not personal knowledge of gemstones. In other words, I've seen people go to, I don't know, jewelry television because they're supposedly selling all this equipment, and they buy a refractometer, and suddenly they have a refractometer, they have a chart, and they know how to put the stone on the refractometer, get a reading, they have a chart, and there you go. They don't know anything about the stone. They don't know anything about the gemstone they're trying to test. They just have a stone, a refractometer, and a reference. And they expect to be able to do gem identification simply because of that. But without knowledge of the gemstones, it can lead you all over the place because you spend too much time testing on using equipment you may not need. If you really know your gemstones, you may not only need but 1 or 2 tests to positively identify a stone, because if you know the gemstones and know the properties, you're going to be able to deductively look at the stone, which is what we're going to talk about in a minute, and not have the problem. But with inductive, you spend a lot of time doing testing and trying to figure out it. There's a lot of time involved. The other problem is there's no way to check if you have an incorrect test result. Test results sometimes come out looking a little weird, like an anomalous double refraction. If you've misidentified an anomalous double refraction and you don't have any way to double check to see if you got it right or not, you're going to sit there for hours trying to figure out what it is because you're going to think this and really it's that. So you don't have a double check to know if your test results are accurate. And by inductively doing gem identification, there's no way to test to see if you've screwed something up. And so once in a while you will. Everybody does. And there's no way to tell about that. And the other thing, there's an over-reliance of books. Everybody has to have the books. You all got to have reference books. And what are you going to do when you go to a gem show? What are you going to do if you go to a mine? What are you going to do if you go out in the field somewhere and you need to do gem identification? And you have to have those reference books to be able to go look up all the material to see what this might be from the reference books. This is the problem with inductive gem identification, because your final incorrect identification often requires you to disregard an important test, because you get to the end of it. You get to the end of your testing and you think, well, this is all it is. And you find that stone that matches maybe 4 out of 5. And you say, well, this is the only thing I can find. It's the only thing I can find. The only thing is that one test didn't match up. So I'm assuming that test's going to be wrong. So I've got all this other. So it must be this only because these 4 out of 5 are right. And you wind up being wrong, because that 5th test result was telling you don't have it correct, but you didn't know it. That's inductive. You're inducting a lot of information and trying to figure out what it is. Okay, that's the problem with that. Now, let's go to deductive gem identification. This is when we deduce what we have. We deduct what we've got. Like a Sherlock Holmes, we're going to deduct it. First thing you're going to do when you're doing deductive gem identification, you're going to look at that gemstone visually. You're going to stop. This is one of the first things that Ian Mercer taught me when I started studying for my FGA at the GMA in London, and later on when I was operating an allied teaching center. Ian Mercer drove this home. The first thing, the most important tool you have in gemology is up here at your eyes, at your brain. It's looking at this and based on your experience, looking at it and formulating what the possibilities are. What could it be? And visually inspecting it. The next thing is you formulate a theory of what that stone is. You don't just start doing a lot of tests. You don't just start saying, okay, well, I got to do refractometer, polariscope, spectroscope, dichroscope. You know, you don't just start doing tests. You look at this stone, and based on what that stone is, you form a theory of what it is. And then you think of the possible identifications based on what you're seeing here. And you think to yourself, okay, looking at this stone, this to me looks most like a whatever. We're going to take an example of this in just a minute. And then you pick the specific gemological test that will disprove what it is. In other words, if you've got a tanzanite, if you've got a purple stone, I should say, if you've got a purple stone and you think it's a tanzanite, and you think, wow, that looks like a tanzanite, how can I disprove this from being a tanzanite? How can I show it's not a tanzanite? And of course, the first thing you pick up is a dichroscope, because tanzanite's going to be blue and purple. And there's nothing else that's going to be blue and purple like that. There's just nothing else out there that's like it. And you can quickly disprove the tanzanite, because if you pick up a dichroscope and it's blue and colorless, well, you know it's not a tanzanite. So what you're doing is looking for a tool, looking for a test that will disprove your theory of what it is. And if you've got a purple stone and your theory is, okay, my theory is it's a tanzanite, you know the first thing you go to is the dichroscope. You don't have to go to the refractometer, because quite frankly, there's some things like synthetic forsterite with a tanzanite that will be exact what the refractometer says and really throw you off. But if you know the stones and you have a theory, I have a theory to tanzanite, how can I prove it's not a tanzanite? The dichroscope will tell me very quickly. And that's the key to this. And if proven incorrect, the steps are repeated. And this is where you can tell if you have a test that's incorrect. Because if you're eliminating, if you say, this is what my theory is, but this test says it's not that, I have to get another theory. I have to go to another stone. If I have a stone that I really think is a tanzanite, and that dichroscope shows it to be blue and colorless, then I have disproven that. I have to go to another one. Personally, I would go to synthetic forsterite that we just talked about and go to a refractive index. It would be the same as tanzanite, okay? But then I'd go to a Chelsea filter to try to disprove that. And if I couldn't disprove it, then I know I'm good. But the thing is, if you disprove everything, then you'll know one of your test results is not correct. Because if you show nothing it could possibly be, then you have to believe and you have to trust that one of your test results is wrong, and you go back and start over. This is the only way to check the validity and accuracy of your test results, is to formulate a theory, try to prove that theory wrong. And if you prove everything wrong, it has to be something. So you go back and do your test again because something is incorrect. It's the only way to know that you've got an incorrect gemological test. Now, the results of the deductive gem identification. First, fewer gemological tests are required. As I just showed you with the example of the tanzanite, there's a lot fewer testing required. You don't have to just go in and do everything. Behind me here that you can see in this little picture, is the whole gemological lab with a Raman, UV vis, and IR. There's all kinds of things back here. You don't have to just go take a shotgun to it and just do every test you have. If you know your stones and you develop that theory, then you do the specific test required for that. And there's less time to perform the test. You'll spend a lot less time doing gemological testing because of the fact that you're being able to be very specific in what you're wanting to find out. And once again, if all gemstone theories are proven wrong, you'll know one of your test results are in error. If one of your tests are in error, there will be nothing that it will be, and you'll wind up with nothing. And then you'll know to go back and say, okay, let's start over and see what we can do again. And you're going to get 100% accurate identifications, because if you're doing this method of deductive gem identification, formulate a theory, prove it wrong. Formulate a theory, prove it wrong. When you can no longer prove it wrong, then it's correct, and it will be 100% accurate, because you've tried everything you can to prove it to be not accurate. And there's only one thing it could be. It's what it is. You'll be 100% accurate in your gem identifications. Let's look at an example here. And this is important, because the thing I want to tell you all, when you're doing this process, you have to really make yourself think, because the natural tendency, I realize, is, well, let's throw a bunch of tests on this and see what we can find out about it. But if you stop and look at it and stop and say, what we're going to do, like here, we're going to look at a green stone. If you stop and look at that green stone and you say to yourself, okay, I've got green stone. I know it's not an amethyst. I know it's not a ruby. I know it's not a tanzanite. I know it's not a lot of things. You can eliminate all that. My theory is it's this. And how do I prove it's not that? And that's what we want to do right here. And what we're going to do here is take this green stone. The gemstone is green. Thereby, it eliminates all but the green gemstones. Now, there's a lot of green gemstones, admittedly. You know, there's peridot, there can be prasiolite, there's garnets. There's a lot of green gemstones. There's sapphires, there's tourmalines, there's a lot. So what we want to do first is look at the stone visually and think to ourselves, what does that look like to me? What does my theory is that will be? And that's your first step. And then my first theory about this would be an emerald, and we're just going to go with an emerald. Let's say that we've been asked to identify this stone. We're going to formulate a theory that this is an emerald. And how will we go about this? We know refractive index of emeralds are 157, 158, basically within that range, and we know it's going to be pretty close in that range. We also know that an emerald is double refractive. That's a property that emerald is known for. That's the property that we can also try to disprove. That emerald is uniaxial negative, and that emeralds colored by chromium are often react to a Chelsea filter. In fact, that's why the Chelsea filter was invented, was to identify chromium in emeralds, in beryls. And so that's going to be something that we know we have in our pocket that we can disprove if we need to. And finally, we're going to do those tests. All right, we know what test we have to disprove the theory of this. We have a theory this is an emerald. How can we prove it's not an emerald? Well, if any of these results are going to be incorrect, then we know it's not going to be that. So what we're going to do here is do the test in order. And when we do that, we find that this gemstone is single refractive. Okay, we put it on polariscope. The first thing we find out, the stone is single refractive. Well, there's no other test required, because emerald's not single refractive. And I don't care what else you run, you can't get a single refractive emerald. It's not going to happen. So we know that it's not an emerald. So what we do is formulate our next theory. Our next theory. Okay, we know gemstones. We know gemstones. We know that a green single refractive gemstone would be a garnet. So what we're going to do is prove it's not a garnet. We're not going to prove it. We're going to prove it's not a garnet. It's a single refractive green stone. And our theory is it's a garnet. And we know that we can do that first thing by refractometer. And when we test this stone in refractometer, it immediately comes up at 1.74. Okay, now our theory is it's a garnet. We know now that the refractive index is 1.74, which there's not much in that range except a garnet. And we already know it's a single refractive stone. So that does not disprove it being a garnet. In fact, it confirms garnet. Refractive index says 1.74. Single refractive said 1.74. There's nothing left. There's nothing left in that range that it can possibly be but a grossular garnet and a sabarite, which this happens to be. This is how this program works. This is how this concept works. You don't just sit down with a stone and start doing a whole massive test and write all those down and then figure out what all they can possibly be. You take a theory of what it is and you try to disprove what it is by the specific test you know to run on that stone. And when you disprove that theory, when you disprove that it's an emerald in this case, then you look at what you have and you form another theory and say, okay, I believe it's going to be a garnet. And you disprove that it's a garnet. And in this case, we couldn't. There's nothing else we can show here. Any test we run on this is going to come up to be a garnet. And that is how you do accurate gem identification. That's what this is all about. This is inductive versus deductive gem identification. And that's what this whole thing is all about. And I wanted to take some time with you today to talk to you about this because I know we have some people struggling with it. And I wanted to make this video to see if perhaps it could be a little more graphic to you about how to do the steps on deductive gem identification. When you go to do a gemstone identification, you don't just sit back and say, okay, here's a stone and just start running through all the tests you possibly can. You look at it with your mind. The one important thing about this, I will tell you, you have to study gemstones. You have to know the gemstones. You have to know that the emerald, you have to know the properties of the emerald. So you'll know, okay, this green, it looks like an emerald to me. What am I going to do specifically to prove it's not an emerald? Well, the first thing was, of course, the polariscope, as we did, and it was single refractive, so it's not an emerald. Pass that on. Take emerald off the table. Single refractive, green stone. What do we know about gemstones? We know the garnets. There's some beautiful green garnets that are single refractive, and that's our next theory. And we proved that it is a garnet because we couldn't disprove it. If you go at it with this, and I realize this is a little, it's a little off the beaten track, the way that most gemology schools teach, but it's why so many people have trouble doing gem identification. And if you go from it in this direction, you'll be 100% accurate because you're either going to prove to the point that you can't disprove it anymore, and it's got to be that, or else you'll find something that you've got, and it may be even an obscure stone that you don't even have a knowledge of, and that's how people identify new stones. But you take that theory of what it is and then try to disprove it. Try to prove it's not what your theory is. And if you can, then you know to go to the next stone. If you can't, then you know that's the identification. I hope this has been of service to you. I wanted to put this together. I've been looking at this for a long time about how can we communicate this. It's one thing to sit here and try to do a bunch of tests and do videos of tests and everything else like that, but it's something else to actually see it. And I want all of my students to go back over this video again and study this again about the steps and how we go through the steps of deductive gem identification, because I think it'll be a great help to you. And I think those of you that are having trouble trying to grasp the procedures of what do I do now when you have a gemstone in front of you, this will give you a very specific set of steps to do that will be guaranteeing you to have an accurate answer at the end. That's what it's all about. I appreciate you joining me for this today. I'll look forward to the next one with you. Have a good time. I'll see you later.